Welcome to Midnight Casebook, where every shadow hides a secret and every mystery begs to be solved. Tonight, we unravel the chilling tale of Father Brown and shocking twist Father Brown reveals, a fan-made story paying homage to the brilliance of G.K. Chesterton's legendary detective. We'd love to have you along for this enigmatic journey. Drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from, share your theories, and if you spot any inconsistencies, don't hesitate to call them out. Your keen eyes and sharp minds help us craft even more captivating mysteries in the future. Chapter 1. The Whispering Shadows. It was the kind of night that made you feel like the world itself was holding its breath, as if the very air had decided to stop moving. Father Brown stood beneath the flickering lamppost, the rain clinging to his coat, like the secrets that always seemed to follow him. A whisper, barely audible, drifted through the cold mist. A whisper that would change everything. That was the moment it all began. When Father Brown, the humble priest known for his quiet wisdom, found himself facing a mystery that would unravel everything he thought he knew. The call had come earlier that night, and it was unlike anything Father Brown had ever encountered. A murder had taken place in the heart of the city, in a place that seemed so ordinary. An old chapel, its stained glass windows dimly glowing under the moonlight. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first, but there was something about the scene that gnawed at Father Brown's instincts. The victim had been found slumped in a pew, the blood from a single, swift wound staining the floor beneath him. The murder was clean, too clean, and the silence surrounding it was suffocating. Father Brown was not a man who believed in coincidences. He had seen too much, understood too much, to be fooled by such things. The town was already whispering of a disgruntled parishioner. An argument turned deadly, but something felt off, like a puzzle missing its most crucial piece. The constables had already arrived and begun their investigation, but Father Brown knew the truth was always deeper than the surface. There was always more to uncover beneath the shadows. The deeper Father Brown delved into the mystery, the more the pieces began to slip through his fingers. Each person he spoke to seemed to know just enough to complicate the case, but never enough to reveal the whole truth. The victim, a man named Mr. Gregory Thorne, had been a quiet figure in the parish, well-liked, always helping with the upkeep of the chapel, but that was the problem. No one ever really knew him. There were no close friends, no deep connections. A man who kept his distance, and yet someone had killed him. Someone who knew more than they should. Father Brown wasn't just dealing with a murder. He was dealing with a web of secrets. It was as if the chapel itself was hiding something ancient, something buried beneath years of prayers and hymns. The victim's last moments were a mystery in themselves. Who had he been meeting with before his death? Why had he been alone in the chapel so late at night? And why had no one seen or heard anything? Every step Father Brown took revealed more contradictions. The statements from the witnesses never lined up. One person claimed to have heard footsteps outside the chapel moments before the murder, but another swore the church was silent all evening. One woman, a regular at the chapel, spoke of seeing a shadow move near the altar just before the body was found. But shadows didn't speak. Shadows didn't leave a trail. The deeper he went, the more questions piled up. The victim's affairs were strange. Father Brown discovered that Gregory Thorne had been involved in a financial dispute with several of the town's wealthier residents. Was this a motive for murder, or just another distraction? There were whispers of hidden money, secret debts, but nothing concrete. As Father Brown pieced together the puzzle, he began to suspect that this was not a case of simple greed or revenge. The real motive was something far darker, far more insidious. Then came the first clue that truly unsettled Father Brown. It was a letter, carefully folded and tucked away in the victim's coat pocket, its contents written in a trembling hand. It was addressed to someone simply known as M. The letter spoke of an impending danger, a warning, but it ended abruptly, the last sentence incomplete. Father Brown was used to solving puzzles, but this was no ordinary puzzle. It felt like a game being played by unseen hands, with rules that were being made up as they went along. He couldn't understand it yet, but he knew one thing. Someone was orchestrating this, pulling the strings from the shadows. There was no obvious explanation, no clear path forward. Father Brown's mind raced with possibilities, each more complicated than the last. Could this be the work of a jilted lover, someone seeking vengeance for an old betrayal? Or was it something deeper, an old grudge that had festered for years? The people in the town, they all had their secrets, but who among them could have killed Gregory Thorne? As Father Brown sat in the dim light of his office, the shadows seemed to grow longer, more oppressive. He was close, so close to the truth, but each answer only led to more questions. The web of lies was tightening, and Father Brown could feel it. Someone was watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. But what was the real motive behind Gregory Thorne's murder? And why did it feel like the answers were slipping further away, like water through his fingers? The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second an agonizing reminder that time was running out. But just as Father Brown thought he might have uncovered something, an old connection, a hidden relationship, he was confronted with a chilling realization. What if this wasn't just a murder? What if it was a message? What if someone wanted him to find the truth, but only on their terms? And then, just as he was about to reach the heart of the mystery, something happened that made Father Brown question everything. A new piece of evidence arrived, one that shattered everything he thought he knew. The message was no longer clear. The shadows grew deeper, darker, and Father Brown found himself staring into a void that was as empty as it was terrifying. The mystery, it seemed, was far from over. But the question remained: who could be trusted in a town where every face hid a secret, where the shadows whispered lies, and no one was who they seemed? Father Brown could feel it. He was on the edge of something much bigger than a simple murder. And as the night stretched on, he couldn't shake the feeling that the true horror was still lurking, just out of reach. The truth was there, waiting to be uncovered. But as the clock ticked down, Father Brown knew one thing for certain: no one would escape the darkness unscathed. Not this time. And then, just before the camera faded to black, Father Brown spoke, his voice calm but heavy with the weight of what he knew. "I know who did it, but the truth will never be told." Chapter 2. Beneath the Veil of Smoke. It was the kind of revelation that could shatter a man's sanity, if you looked too deeply into it. Father Brown didn't look away, though. He never did. But what he found beneath that veil of smoke would haunt him forever. And as he stood there in the dim light of the smoky pub, watching the smoke curl upwards and fade into the darkness, Father Brown realized something far more terrifying than any murder. The truth, once revealed, would destroy more than just lives. It would unravel everything. Father Brown, the unassuming priest, with a mind as sharp as a blade, found himself in the heart of a riddle that felt like it had no solution. The town had been buzzing with rumors ever since Gregory Thorne's death, a murder that had been as clean as it was cold. Everyone seemed to have their theory, their suspicions. But for Father Brown, there was only one certainty. This was no ordinary murder. No, this was a game, an intricate web woven with lies and half-truths, and in the middle of it all, the one person who could reveal the truth was no longer able to speak. The victim's past had been carefully hidden, sealed away in a box of whispered rumors and forgotten deeds. The more Father Brown dug, the deeper the mystery became. Who was Gregory Thorne? The man everyone knew, but no one really knew. The deeper Father Brown searched, the more it seemed like the town itself had buried its secrets beneath layers of lies and falsehoods. And it was there, beneath the veil of smoke, that Father Brown's investigation began to take a dark turn. Father Brown had always been adept at seeing what others missed, at noticing the smallest detail that others overlooked. And yet this case, this tangled mess of shadows and half-answers, was unlike anything he'd ever encountered. He spent hours in the dimly lit chapel, staring at the stained glass windows, trying to piece together the fragments of Gregory Thorne's life. And then there was the strange letter, the one that had been tucked into the victim's coat pocket. It was the only clue Father Brown had, one that would lead him deeper into the heart of this mystery than he could have ever imagined. But it wasn't just the letter that troubled him. It was the people, the townsfolk. Each one of them seemed to have a different version of the truth, but none of them seemed to be telling the whole story. There were the whispers of a secret meeting, a man seen leaving the chapel late that night, but no one could agree on who it was. The more Father Brown heard, the more he realized that there were far too many people who had a reason to lie. The smoke-filled tavern was where Father Brown found himself next, seeking answers from those who knew the town's darkest secrets. The pub was the kind of place where deals were made in the shadows, where words were cheap and promises even cheaper. It was the perfect setting for a mystery, but it was also the place where truths were hidden behind thick clouds of smoke. Father Brown had always known that the truth had a way of slipping through cracks, but here it was as if the truth itself had been buried in the smoke. He spoke to the barkeep, a grizzled man whose eyes never seemed to focus. "He's a good man, that Thorne," the barkeep had said when asked about Gregory. "Always did right by the town. But people don't know everything about him, not like I do." He'd leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Sometimes the past isn't just the past. Sometimes it's what catches up with you." Father Brown hadn't been able to extract much from the man, but what he had said left an unsettling feeling in the pit of his stomach. The past wasn't just the past. It was as if Gregory Thorne's death wasn't just a murder. It was a reckoning for something that had happened long before anyone even knew who Gregory Thorne really was. The next morning, Father Brown made his way to the town's archives, hoping to find something, anything, that might shed light on Gregory's mysterious past. As he sifted through old papers, he stumbled upon something that made his blood run cold. A letter from nearly 20 years ago, written by a man named Alexander Coyle. The letter was addressed to someone by the name of M. The contents were brief, but the message was unmistakable. "It's time to end this. The secrets we've kept will ruin us all. You know what to do." The handwriting was shaky, as if the writer had been under duress. But what struck Father Brown most was the name M, the same name that had appeared in Gregory's final letter, the same mysterious figure who seemed to be at the center of it all. Father Brown didn't know what to make of it. Was M a person from Gregory's past? Or was it someone connected to the town's darker history? The more he uncovered, the more it seemed like every piece of the puzzle only led to more questions. It was as if someone had orchestrated this entire tragedy, pulling the strings from the shadows, and Father Brown could feel the weight of that realization bearing down on him. The next day, as Father Brown sat in the back of the chapel, trying to gather his thoughts, a young woman approached him. Her face was pale, and there was a haunted look in her eyes, as though she had seen something she couldn't unsee. She introduced herself as Edith, a former friend of Gregory's, and she seemed desperate to speak with him. Father Brown led her to a quiet corner of the church, where she nervously wrung her hands. "I don't know who to trust anymore," she said, her voice shaking. "I thought I knew Gregory, but there were things he kept from me, things I don't even want to believe." "What things?" Father Brown asked, his tone gentle but firm. She hesitated before speaking. "There was a woman. He was seeing someone. A woman from out of town. I don't know who she was, but I overheard him talking about her once. He said he was afraid of what she might do if she found out the truth. He was always worried that something would come for him, that someone would come for him." Father Brown felt a cold shiver run down his spine. This was the first time anyone had mentioned a woman in connection with Gregory Thorne. It seemed as though every new detail only added to the growing sense of danger surrounding the case. And if Gregory had been involved with someone powerful enough to make him afraid, then Father Brown knew he was getting closer to the heart of the mystery. But as he pressed Edith for more details, she grew more evasive, her eyes darting nervously around the room. It was clear she was hiding something, but what? And why? Was she trying to protect someone, or was she just scared of the truth? As the investigation deepened, Father Brown found himself facing a terrifying thought. What if everything he had uncovered so far was just a distraction? What if the true culprit, the one behind Gregory's murder, was someone who had been hiding in plain sight all along? But just when Father Brown thought he was on the verge of uncovering the truth, something happened that forced him to question everything. A new piece of evidence arrived. An unexpected visitor to the chapel, someone who claimed to have been at the scene of the crime. They had seen something that could blow the entire case wide open. But as Father Brown listened to their story, he realized that the new information only deepened the mystery. Nothing was as it seemed, and the more he learned, the less he understood. With every answer came a dozen more questions. The truth was slipping further away with each passing moment, and Father Brown knew that the clock was ticking. Whoever had killed Gregory Thorne had planned this meticulously, carefully, pulling strings from the shadows. And as Father Brown stepped out into the misty night, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far darker. The last words he spoke to himself before disappearing into the fog were chilling. "I know who did it, but I will never tell." And then the screen went black. The mystery, it seemed, was only just beginning. Chapter 3. A Silent Confession. It was the confession no one ever heard, but the one everyone would regret. Father Brown knew the moment the words escaped his lips that they were true, though he had no idea how devastating they would become. The victim's confession, the one that had remained unspoken for so long, would soon haunt more than just the town of Gillingham. It would haunt Father Brown himself, But the most chilling part, he hadn't even heard it yet. No one had. The murder of Gregory Thorne was far from the straightforward crime it had seemed. With each passing hour, the mystery grew more convoluted. The people of Gillingham were starting to whisper. Each person connected to Gregory's life now looked more like a suspect than a bystander. And Father Brown, as always, was in the center of it all, trying to untangle a web that was darker than he could have ever imagined. The town had its suspicions about Gregory. Some said he was a quiet man, too quiet, with a history no one dared to explore. His death was a shock, but it didn't seem to belong to just the present. No, it seemed to reach back in time, as if something from his past had finally come calling. But there was something worse, something Father Brown had felt in his gut since the beginning of this case. There was a secret Gregory had taken to his grave. Father Brown could feel it in the way the townspeople spoke, or rather, didn't speak. There were gaps in their stories, hidden, fragments that they tried to pass off as nothing. But Father Brown wasn't fooled. What made him different from the other investigators was his ability to notice what was hidden in plain sight. The silences, the fleeting glances, the subtle discomfort in people's voices when they spoke about Gregory. The truth was out there, but every step closer to it felt like walking deeper into a labyrinth. The more Father Brown tried to peel back the layers of Gregory's life, the more he found himself surrounded by an impenetrable fog. But he wasn't one to back down, and the mysteries he couldn't solve only motivated him more. He had long since given up on finding easy answers. What haunted him now was what no one seemed to want to say, what no one dared to say. The first piece of the puzzle came from a woman named Lydia Porter, a neighbor of Gregory's who had been in the chapel the night he was murdered. She was the one person who might have seen something, anything, that could explain the strange circumstances surrounding his death. But when Father Brown spoke with her, it was clear she was holding back. She claimed to have seen nothing unusual, nothing out of place, but her eyes darted nervously when Father Brown asked her about Gregory's behavior in the days leading up to his death. I don't know, Lydia stammered, her face pale. Gregory wasn't himself lately. He said he'd been hearing things that didn't make sense. I thought he was just imagining it, but maybe it was real. Father Brown's mind raced. Was Lydia lying, or was she merely too terrified to speak the truth? Something told him that whatever Gregory had been hearing, whatever he'd been afraid of, had something to do with the crime. It was too coincidental, too fitting to be a simple case of a random murder. But what was worse, Gregory's fear or his silence? The trail led Father Brown deeper into the town's hidden history. The more he spoke to people who knew Gregory, the more he uncovered secrets that had been carefully buried. Whispers of a woman, someone from Gregory's past, kept cropping up, but her identity remained a mystery. Was this woman connected to the strange things Gregory had been hearing? Had she been the one who truly caused his death? The investigation seemed to lead in a dozen directions, none of them fruitful. Father Brown could see that his usual method of patiently observing and connecting small details wasn't enough this time. This case was different. He needed something more than just observation. He needed a break, a piece of evidence that could tie everything together. But with every step forward, the fog of confusion grew thicker. Days passed, and Father Brown found himself back in the chapel, sitting in the same pew where Gregory had taken his final breath. It was here amidst the rows of empty wooden benches, that Father Brown realized something. The place where Gregory had died wasn't just a crime scene. It was a stage for a play that was being written by someone else, someone with far more control than anyone had yet realized. Father Brown looked around the chapel, his mind racing. He could almost feel the weight of the past pressing down on him. There was a story here, hidden in the walls of this old building. Gregory had come here to confront something, or perhaps someone. But what was it? And why had Gregory felt the need to confess? The answer came to him in a flash of insight, but it was one that unsettled him to the core. The confession had never been spoken aloud, not to anyone. Gregory hadn't said a word before his death, but he had been preparing for something. The weight of his final days, the things he had feared, had finally come crashing down upon him. The truth was, in that confession, Father Brown realized, it was just waiting to be uncovered. But the mystery was far from solved. In fact, it was becoming more complicated by the minute. It was at that moment, in the quiet of the chapel, that Father Brown met someone who could finally shed light on Gregory's final days, a man named Arthur Carlyle, a former confidant of Gregory's. Carlyle had left town years ago, but had returned after Gregory's death, clearly shaken by the news. His face was gaunt, his eyes wide with suspicion, as though he'd been expecting Father Brown to show up. "I'm not the one who can tell you what happened," Carlyle said, his voice trembling. "But I can tell you one thing. Gregory wasn't just afraid of dying. He was afraid of something far worse, something that had been following him for years." Father Brown studied him carefully, his mind racing with questions. "What do you mean?" Carlyle swallowed hard, glancing over his shoulder, as though worried someone might overhear. "There's something you don't know about Gregory's past," he whispered. "He didn't just kill time in the town. He spent years running from something he couldn't escape." Father Brown felt the air shift. What had Gregory been running from, and why had he felt compelled to confess it all? Carlyle's words hung in the air like a fragile thread, ready to snap. But before Carlyle could say another word, something strange happened. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation, and Father Brown's heart skipped a beat. He opened it to find a figure standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light of the street. It was a woman. No, a girl. And she looked as though she had seen something she wasn't meant to. "I know who killed him," she whispered, her voice shaking. Father Brown's heart raced. This was it. The breakthrough. The moment that would end the mystery once and for all. But before he could speak, the girl collapsed to the floor, her body limp in Father Brown's arms. As he tried to revive her, the last words she muttered sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't just one person, it was all of them. Gregory's confession. He knew who they were. Father Brown froze. What did that mean? Who were they? And what confession had Gregory left behind that was so dangerous, so explosive, that it could get someone killed for knowing it? The screen fades to black. Father Brown's voice echoes in the darkness. "I know who did it, but the truth will never be told." Chapter 4. The Darkened Crossroads. "If you want the truth, Father, you'll have to kill me first." Father Brown was no stranger to dark secrets, but nothing in his life had prepared him for the cold, unmistakable terror in those words. The moment they were spoken, the ground beneath him seemed to shift, and for the first time in this case, Father Brown wondered if he'd bitten off more than he could chew. The truth was out there, yes, but it was buried beneath layers of deceit so thick that Even his sharp mind was struggling to break through. The mysterious murder of Gregory Thorne had already taken Father Brown on a journey he could never have predicted. From the quiet chapel where Thorne's blood had been spilled to the veiled whispers of his past, Father Brown had unearthed fragments of a puzzle that seemed impossible to solve. Each piece he discovered only deepened the mystery, making him question the very nature of truth itself. And just when it seemed like he might have reached the heart of it all, the ground shifted again. Now, standing at a crossroads both literal and metaphorical, Father Brown was more uncertain than ever. What he thought he knew about Gregory's death had been torn apart. The world around him seemed to be closing in, and with each step forward, he found himself drawn deeper into a web of lies, fear, and manipulation that stretched back farther than anyone could have imagined. It all started with the conversation he had with Edith, a woman who claimed to have been Gregory's confidant. She had hinted at something bigger than the murder itself, something that lay hidden beneath the surface of Gregory's life, and perhaps his death. She had spoken of a man, a figure from Gregory's past, who seemed to have been pulling strings from the shadows. She said that Gregory had feared him. But why? And who was this person that even Gregory couldn't escape? As Father Brown navigated the darkened streets of Gillingham, seeking answers, the case became ever more complicated. What had seemed like a simple murder was now a complex tapestry of hidden motives, whispered threats, and long-buried secrets. It was as if the entire town had conspired to hide something from the world, and Father Brown was the only one left who could see through the cracks. But what if that was exactly what someone wanted? The first step was to follow the new lead he had gathered. Edith's mention of a mysterious figure who was supposed to have been a major part of Gregory's life. But Edith's knowledge, as it turned out, was limited. Father Brown sought out everyone who might have known Gregory from a time long before his arrival in Gillingham. As he sifted through old acquaintances and distant memories, he discovered a common thread, a figure named Jonathan Stokes. Stokes was not a man well known to the townsfolk, but the few who did speak of him seemed to do so in hushed tones, as if his very name carried with it a danger that they were unwilling to acknowledge. Father Brown's search led him to an old, decrepit house on the outskirts of town. It was a place that had been abandoned for years, but it still seemed to pulse with the echoes of something dark. The air around it was thick with decay, as if the house itself had been poisoned by the secrets it held within. Father Brown had hoped that the search would give him a clue, a break in the case that might explain the growing fear in the town. But what he found only left him with more questions. Inside the house, there was no sign of Stokes himself, but there was something far worse. A room, hidden away behind a false wall, contained shelves filled with dusty books, old letters, and photographs. It was clear that someone had spent a great deal of time here, someone who had kept careful records, documenting every detail of Gregory Thorne's life. There, among the piles of forgotten artifacts, Father Brown discovered something that made his heart race. A letter addressed to Gregory that had been carefully folded and placed at the top of the pile. The contents of the letter were chilling. It wasn't just a letter of correspondence, it was a warning. The writer, though anonymous, claimed to have known Gregory's darkest secret. The letter spoke of debts that could never be repaid, of lives lost, and of a promise that would be kept at all costs. But the most terrifying part, the letter ended with a cryptic statement: "The time will come when the past will claim its due. Only then will you be free. Father Brown stood frozen for a moment, trying to process the implications of the letter. What had Gregory done that was so terrible, and who had he made this promise to? It was clear now that the murder was just a small piece of a much larger puzzle, one that involved forces far more dangerous than Father Brown had anticipated. As Father Brown tried to make sense of what he had uncovered, he was interrupted by a sudden and unexpected visitor, Jonathan Stokes himself. The man appeared out of nowhere, emerging from the shadows like a ghost, his face cold and unreadable. Stokes' presence was almost suffocating, like a storm cloud hanging over the chapel, and Father Brown immediately felt a shift in the air. "I've been expecting you," Stokes said, his voice low and calm, as though he knew exactly what Father Brown was thinking. Father Brown's heart raced, but he didn't flinch. He had come this far, and he couldn't afford to back down now. "I know who you are," Father Brown said, his voice steady, "but I don't know why you're hiding." Stokes smiled, but it was a thin, humorless smile. "Hiding? I'm not hiding, Father. I'm just waiting. You're too late to stop anything now." Father Brown felt a chill run down his spine. What was Stokes talking about? What had he meant by that cryptic statement? And why was he so certain that Father Brown couldn't stop what was coming? "I don't understand," Father Brown said, his voice barely a whisper. "Why kill Gregory? What was he hiding?" Stokes's eyes darkened. Gregory wasn't hiding anything. He was the one who was going to expose everything. And that was never part of the plan. Father Brown felt a knot form in his stomach. Expose everything. What was Stokes talking about? What was Gregory going to expose? And why had someone gone to such great lengths to silence him? Stokes stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Father Brown's. "The truth is a dangerous thing, Father. Some things are better left buried." Father Brown felt his blood run cold. The weight of Stokes's words settled heavily on him, and for the first time, he realized just how deep this conspiracy went. Stokes wasn't just a suspect in Gregory's murder. He was the key to everything. And the more Father Brown pressed for answers, the more he realized that Stokes was not only willing to protect his secrets at all costs, but he was also willing to take Father Brown down with him. "I can't stop it now," Stokes said, his voice low. "I've come too far, and so have you." Father Brown felt a growing sense of dread. What had he stumbled upon? What was Stokes so afraid of? And why did it feel like they were standing on the edge of something much darker than a simple murder? The darkness in Stokes's eyes told Father Brown that the worst was still to come. And as the man turned and disappeared back into the shadows, Father Brown realized that he was more entangled in this mystery than he had ever been before. The truth was within reach, but it was slipping away. And the deeper Father Brown went, the more dangerous the path became. He had only just begun to understand how deep the conspiracy ran. What had started as a simple murder had now turned into something far more complex and far more deadly. The screen fades to black, and Father Brown's voice echoes, leaving the audience on the edge of their seat. "I know who did it, but I fear that no one will ever know the full truth." And then the screen cuts to darkness. Heavens themselves were weeping for the truth that seemed so close and yet so far away. Father Brown had to act. He had to make a choice. Pursue Stokes, try to save Edith, or find out what had happened to Gregory before it was too late. As Father Brown looked up, Stokes was already gone. slipping back into the mist, as though he had never been there. Only the sound of the rain remained, as if the world had erased his existence entirely. Father Brown held Edith closer, her breath shallow, her pulse weakening. "Don't leave me, Edith," he whispered, but deep down he knew there was little he could do now. In that moment, Father Brown realized something so dark, so unsettling, that it made his stomach churn. Edith had known too much, but she had spoken too late. There were forces in this town, forces far beyond a single murder, that had been working in the shadows for years, and now, it seemed, Father Brown was caught in their web. As he carried Edith to safety, he couldn't shake the question that haunted him. What had Gregory known? And more importantly, what had Edith meant by that kiss? The story was only just beginning. But in the back of Father Brown's mind, one thing was certain. No one would be leaving this town without paying the price for their secrets. The screen fades to black, and Father Brown's voice cuts through the silence. "I know who did it. But the truth, Father, the truth will never be told." Chapter 5. A Kiss in the Rain. The first thing Father Brown noticed was the smell, not of incense or damp stone, but something far worse, the scent of fear. It clung to the chapel's wooden pews, to the stone floor, still glistening with rainwater, to the very air itself. And then, just as he was about to call out, he heard it. A whisper, so soft it barely reached his ears. "You don't understand. He wasn't murdered. He was silenced." The words sent a chill through him, colder than the rain that had soaked through his coat. He turned slowly, his sharp eyes cutting through the dim candlelight. And there, standing in the archway, was Edith. Her dress was soaked through, the fabric clinging to her trembling frame. Strands of dark hair hung across her face, her breathing ragged as if she had been running for miles. But it was her eyes that unsettled him the most. Wild, desperate, glistening with something that was not just rain. Father Brown stepped forward, his voice calm, measured. "Edith, why are you here?" She swallowed hard, glancing over her shoulder before whispering, "They know I'm here." A gust of wind howled through the chapel, rattling the stained glass windows. The flickering candlelight threw distorted shadows across the altar, twisting them into shapes that did not belong. Father Brown felt a shiver crawl up his spine. "Who?" he asked, watching as Edith's hands clenched into fists. "The ones who made Gregory disappear," she said, her voice barely audible. "The ones who—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. Her gaze drifted past him, and for the briefest moment, her lips parted as if she were seeing something she shouldn't. Father Brown turned sharply, expecting to find someone standing in the shadows. But there was nothing, just the empty pews, the darkness pressing in from all sides, and the rain tapping against the windows like fingers trying to get in. When he turned back to Edith, she had moved, stepped closer, close enough that he could see the way her chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. And then, before he could react, she reached for him. She kissed him. It wasn't a kiss of passion. It wasn't a kiss of love. It was something else entirely. It was desperation. It was a confession. A silent, wordless plea that carried the weight of something unspeakable. And the moment her lips left his, Father Brown knew with the certainty that made his stomach twist, that this was not a kiss meant to ask for forgiveness. It was a goodbye. He stepped back, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. "What have you done, Edith?" She blinked, her lips still parted, and shook her head. "I loved him, Father, but I didn't kill him. I swear to you, I didn't kill him." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment, Father Brown almost believed her. But then he saw it. A handprint, fresh, not on the floor, not on the door, on the wooden pew. A handprint, made of something darker than water. The rain had washed everything clean, but it hadn't washed away the blood. Chapter 6. The Sinister Benefactor. It wasn't the money that made him dangerous, it was the promise that came with it. Father Brown had seen many things in his years of service: deception, betrayal, the ugliness that lurked beneath the surface of even the most seemingly virtuous lives. But nothing had prepared him for the revelation that lay hidden in the heart of this case. Nothing that could make his mind race in so many directions at once. A benefactor, a man whose influence stretched far beyond the reach of normal people. And it was this man, this hidden hand, who had been controlling the strings all along. The murder of Gregory Thorne had seemed straightforward enough at first. A well-liked man with a mysterious past who was found dead in a quiet chapel. But as Father Brown dug deeper, the layers began to peel away, revealing a dark, tangled web of manipulation and deceit. Every person he spoke to, every new piece of information he uncovered, only made the mystery more complicated. But nothing was more disturbing than what Father Brown had learned in the last few days. This wasn't a simple murder. This was a plan, a sinister scheme that involved a figure who had been pulling the strings from behind the scenes, making moves long before Gregory's death, and perhaps manipulating events in ways that no one could have expected. Father Brown had been led to a small, unassuming office in the heart of Gillingham. It was here, amidst the old leather, chairs and dusty bookshelves, that Father Brown met with the lawyer who had been handling Gregory Thorne's affairs. At first, the lawyer seemed harmless enough. A man in his late 50s, his graying hair neatly combed, his demeanor professional and detached. But as Father Brown began to ask questions about Gregory's financials, the lawyer's calm exterior began to crack. There was something in the way he responded, in the way his eyes flickered to the door every few seconds, that made Father Brown uneasy. "I don't know what you're getting at, Father," the lawyer said, his voice tight. Gregory was a man of principle. He was always careful with his finances. He didn't want to owe anyone anything. But Father Brown could see through the facade. The lawyer's hands shook slightly as he shuffled through a pile of papers, as though trying to avoid something hidden beneath the surface. "I'm not here to discuss his debts," Father Brown said, his voice steady. "I'm here to understand why Gregory was in such fear of someone who could control his every move." At the mention of the word fear, the lawyer stiffened. His face grew pale, and his lips pressed into a thin line. "Father, I can't tell you everything," the lawyer murmured. "Some things are too dangerous to speak of." Father Brown leaned in. "Then tell me this. Who was Gregory's benefactor? The one who paid for his debts? The one who made sure he stayed in line?" The lawyer's eyes darted nervously around the room, as though expecting someone to burst through the door. Father Brown could feel the tension in the air, and he knew he was getting close to something important. "It's not that simple," the lawyer said, his voice strained. "Gregory owed his life to a man who—" The lawyer stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening in horror. A loud knock echoed from the door, interrupting the conversation. Before Father Brown could react, the lawyer stood up quickly and rushed to the door. He opened it a crack, revealing a tall figure standing outside. The figure's face was obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but Father Brown could feel the presence of someone powerful, someone dangerous. The lawyer exchanged a few words with the figure, but Father Brown could hear nothing. He knew this was no ordinary visitor. Whoever this person was, they were the key to everything. The lawyer returned to his seat, his face now ashen. "I can't talk anymore," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You need to leave. Now, before it's too late." Father Brown stood, his heart racing. He had barely gathered any information before the lawyer had shut down completely, but he knew something was wrong, something much darker than a simple murder. Gregory had been caught in a web of fear and manipulation, and the more Father Brown learned, the more he realized that the true villain wasn't just someone who'd killed Gregory, it was someone who had been controlling him, guiding his every step. As Father Brown made his way back to the chapel, his mind raced. Who was this benefactor? Who had the power to control Gregory and everyone around him? Was there someone in this town who had been orchestrating these events from the shadows, pulling strings and making sure no one got too close to the truth? It was then that Father Brown realized he was no longer investigating just a murder. He was investigating a conspiracy, a scheme so elaborate that it made everything he had uncovered so far seem insignificant. It wasn't just about Gregory's death. It was about understanding why Gregory had been so terrified, and why no one in the town seemed willing to talk about it. The answer came in the form of a letter Gregory had written just days before his death. It had been hidden in the floorboards of the chapel, waiting to be discovered. The letter, written in Gregory's familiar hand, spoke of fear, of a man who had controlled every aspect of his life. It spoke of a debt that could never be repaid, and a promise that Gregory had made, one that would cost him his life. "I cannot escape," the letter read. "I thought I could outrun him, but I was wrong. He is always watching, always waiting. I am his puppet, and I fear I will die at his command. There is no way out." Father Brown's hands trembled as he read the letter, feeling the weight of Gregory's words settle heavily on his chest. The man who had controlled Gregory's life was not just a criminal or a shadowy figure. No, he was something far worse. He was a man of influence, a benefactor whose power stretched far beyond the confines of the town. He could make people do anything. He could ruin lives and destroy reputations with a single word. Father Brown now understood. Gregory hadn't just been a victim of a murder. He had been a victim of someone who had used him, controlled him, and ultimately driven him to his death. And that someone was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their next victim. The realization hit Father Brown like a ton of bricks. The town itself was caught in this web of fear and manipulation. The benefactor wasn't just a figure from Gregory's past. He was a powerful presence in the present, and it was Father Brown's mission to uncover him, to expose the man who had controlled Gregory's life, and to stop him before he could destroy anyone else. But just as Father Brown prepared to set his plan into motion, something happened that shook him to his core. A figure appeared in the doorway of the chapel, someone Father Brown had not expected to see. It was the lawyer, but he wasn't alone. Behind him stood the very figure Father Brown had feared. The benefactor, the man who had been controlling everything from the shadows. The lawyer stepped aside, his face pale and resigned. "I couldn't stop him," he whispered, his voice filled with regret. Father Brown's heart stopped. The benefactor was finally here. And just as Father Brown moved to confront him, the benefactor stepped forward, his face finally revealed in the dim light of the chapel. It was a face Father Brown recognized all too well. It was someone he had trusted. And that, dear viewer, is where we leave you, just as Father Brown realizes that the truth he has been seeking may have been staring him in the face all along. I know who did it, but the truth, Father, Brown whispers, his voice heavy with the weight of the revelation. The truth will never be told. Chapter 7. Eyes in the Fog. Father Brown knew that the killer was staring right at him, just beyond the fog, but when he turned to face them, there was no one there. The fog had always been a perfect cover for secrets, and tonight it felt heavier than ever. It wasn't just the weather. No, tonight the air was thick with lies. Lies that had been buried for far too long, now clawing their way back into the light. Father Brown stood at the edge of Gillingham, his eyes narrowing as he peered into the haze that blanketed the town. The silence felt suffocating, and somewhere in that silence, a pair of eyes watched him, eyes full of secrets, eyes full of danger. This was no longer about Gregory Thorne's murder. This was about something far deeper, a darkness that had taken root in the town, a darkness that would stop at nothing to keep its secrets hidden. And as Father Brown moved through the fog, he could feel it closing in on him like a noose tightening around his neck. Father Brown had been on the case for weeks now, and each step closer to the truth only revealed more questions. He had thought that the discovery of Gregory's benefactor, an elusive figure who seemed to control every aspect of Gregory's life, had brought him closer to solving the mystery, but now he realized that it was only the beginning. What he had uncovered was far more sinister than anyone could have predicted. The fog rolled in thick and fast, obscuring the street lamps and casting long, twisting shadows across the cobblestones. Father Brown had seen fog like this before, but tonight it felt different. It was as if the fog itself was hiding something or someone. He moved through the mist with caution, his eyes scanning the edges of the street, where the shadows seemed to move with a life of their own. It had started with the disappearance of Edith, the woman who had once been a source of hope, a person who had claimed to know the truth about Gregory's death. But now, she was gone, vanished without a trace, just like so many others in Gillingham. Father Brown couldn't shake the feeling that someone somewhere had been pulling strings that led directly to him. The more he thought about it, the more certain he became that the answers weren't in the town. They were in the fog itself, waiting to be uncovered, waiting to reveal the truth. And tonight Father Brown knew would be the night he would face the truth, no matter the cost. He turned a corner, and suddenly he froze. There, standing in the middle of the street, was a figure, a shadow, a silhouette barely visible in the dense fog. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, but Father Brown could feel their presence, like a cold chill crawling down his spine. He stepped forward, his steps slow and deliberate, but the figure didn't flinch. It was as if they were expecting him. Father Brown's breath caught in his throat as he neared the figure, and for a split second he thought he saw a glint of something in their eyes, something that was unmistakably familiar. But just as he reached out to speak, the figure turned, fading into the fog, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. Father Brown stood there, heart pounding in his chest, unsure of what he had just seen. Had it been real, or had the fog played tricks on his mind? But the glint in those eyes The feeling of being watched, it was real. Father Brown had no doubt about that. He was being drawn deeper into this mystery, and it was clear now that someone was watching him. Someone who knew exactly how to make him question everything he thought he knew. He continued his journey, walking through the fog, his thoughts racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about Gregory's death. No, this was about something much bigger. Something that involved more than just the townspeople of Gillingham. He had been investigating the wrong things, following leads that were meant to distract him, to lead him down a path of false hope. The fog seemed to close in tighter with each step, the streets growing darker, more twisted, and then out of nowhere, a voice broke the silence. "You're getting too close, Father." Father Brown spun around, his heart racing. The voice was low, cold, and oddly familiar, but the street was empty. There was no one there. "You can't trust anyone, Father," the voice continued, echoing in his mind. "Not even yourself." Father Brown's pulse quickened as he looked around, his eyes scanning the street, but there was no sign of anyone. The fog was suffocating now, filling his lungs with each breath, and the voice continued to haunt him, growing louder and louder. "You see, Father, you're not the one in control here. You never were." Father Brown's mind raced. Who was speaking to him, and what did they mean by those words? He had always prided himself on his ability to uncover the truth, to see through deception. But now, it felt as though the truth was slipping further and further from his grasp. Who was the person behind the voice? What were they trying to tell him? The fog seemed to grow denser, the shadows deeper. Father Brown stumbled forward, trying to make sense of the disembodied words in his mind. Was this a warning or a threat? And then, just as he thought he might lose his grip on reality, he saw it. A figure standing in the distance. A person, or rather, the outline of a person silhouetted against the fog. Father Brown's heart skipped a beat. This time, there was no mistaking it. This was no trick of the fog. This was real. He moved closer, the figure still standing motionless, as if waiting for him. Father Brown called out, his voice strong, but filled with an urgency that made him feel vulnerable. "Who are you?" he asked, his words carrying through the thick mist. The figure didn't respond, but instead, they stepped forward, emerging from the fog like a shadow, coming to life. And as they came closer, Father Brown saw the unmistakable gleam in their eyes, the same glint he had seen earlier. But this time, the eyes weren't just familiar. They were familiar in a way that made Father Brown's blood run cold. It was someone he recognized. The person before him was no stranger. They were someone from his past, someone who had been connected to Gregory, someone whose name he had heard whispered in the dark corners of the town. It was him, the man who had been pulling the strings all along, the benefactor, the one who had manipulated Gregory, controlled his life, and now controlled everything Father Brown had uncovered. The person who had been orchestrating the entire web of lies. Father Brown's mind raced. How had he not seen it before? The figure before him wasn't just a murderer. They were the mastermind behind it all. The one who had been hiding in the fog, watching every move Father Brown made. The man smiled, a cold, twisted grin that sent a shiver down Father Brown's spine. "You really thought you could solve this, didn't you, Father?" he said, his voice low, almost mocking. "You've been playing my game all along, and now you're finally going to learn just how deep it goes." Father Brown's mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. He had been so close to the truth, but now he realized He had only scratched the surface. Everything he had uncovered, everything he had believed, had been a carefully crafted illusion, an illusion designed to draw him in, to keep him chasing shadows until it was too late. The fog seemed to close in around them, and Father Brown took a step back, his mind spinning. What was the truth? Who could he trust? And how could he stop this man, the one who had been manipulating everyone, including him? The man stepped closer, his eyes glinting, with something far darker than Father Brown had imagined. "You're too late, Father," he said. "The game is already over." And with that, the fog swallowed them both, leaving only the sound of Father Brown's breath in the thickening mist. The screen fades to black. Father Brown's voice, faint but urgent, echoes in the darkness. "I know who did it. But the truth, Father, the truth will never be told." Chapter 8. The Unseen Witness. "You've been looking in all the wrong places, Father. The answer was right in front of you the entire time." Father Brown stood frozen, his mind racing. It was a revelation so profound that it hit him like a punch to the gut. All the twists, the mysteries, the lies that had entangled his every move, they had been leading him to the wrong conclusion. For weeks, he had pieced together a puzzle that was incomplete, a puzzle that, with this new information, now seemed irrelevant. Everything he thought he knew was shattered. The real truth was hiding, not in the places he had searched, but in the shadows that no one could see. This wasn't just a murder case anymore. This was an investigation into the very fabric of the town of Gillingham, a place where secrets ran deep and lies festered beneath the surface. It had all started with the brutal killing of Gregory Thorne, a man whose past had been as shadowed as the town itself. But now, Father Brown knew that what had led to Gregory's death was something far more complicated, something that involved not just one person, but everyone around him. The town had seemed so quiet at first, so simple, but now it felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode with the weight of its secrets. The murder wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Father Brown had always relied on his sharp instincts and quiet observation. He prided himself on seeing what others missed, but tonight he felt as though he had been blind all along. The truth had been staring him in the face, hidden in plain sight, and yet he couldn't see it. But now it was too late. The unseen witness had spoken, and Father Brown was left standing on the precipice of a revelation that would change everything. The night air was thick with fog, the streets empty except for Father Brown and the few souls who wandered the dimly lit streets of Gillingham. He had followed every lead, spoken to every possible witness, and yet no one had ever mentioned the one detail that could have unlocked everything. That was the problem. Everyone had been too busy protecting their own secrets. They had all been complicit in the silence. It all began when Father Brown went back to the chapel, hoping to make sense of the clues he had gathered so far. As he stood at the altar, his eyes wandered to the rows of empty pews, and he thought back to the moments after Gregory's body had been discovered. The chapel had felt so silent, so void of life. But what if that silence had been hiding something? What if there had been someone watching, someone who had seen everything, someone whose very existence had been ignored? It was then that Father Brown remembered something, a quiet, overlooked detail that had been dismissed by everyone else. A woman who had been present in the chapel the night Gregory was killed. At the time, no one had paid her any attention. She had been a mere figure in the background, someone no one had questioned. But that was exactly what made her important. Her name was Clara Penn, a local seamstress, who had come to the chapel that night to pray, as she did most evenings. She had been there, sitting quietly in the back pew, when Gregory's body was discovered. No one had ever asked her about what she had seen. No one had thought it necessary. But now, Father Brown realized she might hold the key to everything. He immediately sought her out, following the quiet cobblestone paths that led to her small cottage on the edge of town. Clara's house was modest, a small, unassuming building that seemed to blend into the shadows of the town. As Father Brown approached, he could feel the weight of the mystery pressing on him, and for the first time in days, he was filled with doubt. Would Clara know something, or was she just another piece of the puzzle that wouldn't fit? When Clara opened the door, she looked surprised, but not frightened. She had known Father Brown for years, and although they weren't close, she had always respected him. Father Brown introduced himself and explained that he needed to speak with her about the night Gregory Thorne died. Clara's face shifted ever so slightly, and Father Brown could tell she was hiding something. But what? What had she seen that made her so cautious? "I don't know if I can be of help, Father," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I didn't see much, just like everyone else. I was just praying, minding my own business." Father Brown knew she was lying. He could see it in the way her eyes flickered, in the way her fingers trembled as she clasped her hands tightly together. "Clara," Father Brown said gently, "I know it's difficult, but I need you to think back. You were there that night. You saw something, didn't you? You saw something that no one else did. Something that could help me understand what happened." Clara hesitated, looking down at the floor. There was a long silence before she finally spoke. "I didn't want to get involved, Father. I didn't want to cause trouble," she said quietly. "But now, I think you need to know. The night Gregory was murdered, I heard something. I heard footsteps, but they weren't like anyone else's. They were soft, too soft. And then I saw him." Father Brown's heart raced. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. "Who did you see, Clara?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Clara took a deep breath and looked up at Father Brown, her eyes wide with fear. "I saw someone standing in the shadows," she said, her voice barely audible. "It was a man, tall and thin, wearing a hat, but I couldn't see his face. All I could see were his eyes, Father. They were watching me, watching Gregory. He was there, in the shadows, and I think he was waiting for Gregory to be alone." Father Brown's mind spun. He had heard the rumors, the whispers about a mysterious figure in Gillingham, someone who had been seen watching Gregory from the shadows. But no one had ever connected him to the murder. Everyone had assumed that Gregory's death was a random act of violence. But Clara's words were a game changer. The man in the shadows, the unseen witness, wasn't just a bystander. He was the one pulling the strings. Father Brown's pulse quickened. "Do you know who he is?" he asked, urgently. Clara shook her head. "No, Father. I couldn't see his face, but there was something about him, something that felt wrong, like he was hiding something, like he knew more than anyone else. But he was gone before anyone could see him. By the time I looked back, he was already gone." Father Brown's mind raced. Clara had seen something critical, something no one else had. But who was the man in the shadows? And why had he been watching Gregory? What was his connection to the murder? Clara's voice broke through his thoughts. Father, I don't know if I should be telling you this. It's dangerous, but I think that man had something to do with everything. The murder, Gregory's death. He was there, watching. Father Brown stood up abruptly, his mind whirling. This was bigger than he had thought. The unseen witness wasn't just an observer. He was the key to unlocking the entire mystery. But how could Father Brown find him? How could he prove that the man in the shadows was connected to Gregory's murder? As Father Brown turned to leave, his thoughts racing, he heard Clara's voice one last time. Father, be careful. You don't know what you're up against. There are people who don't want you to uncover the truth. Father Brown nodded silently, his resolve hardening. The fog outside seemed to thicken, wrapping around him like a shroud. He had one goal now, to find the man with the eyes in the shadows and uncover the truth that had been buried for so long. But as Father Brown walked into the night, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Someone was out there, hidden in the fog, waiting for him to make a move. And he had no idea who or what he was truly up against. The screen fades to black. Father Brown's voice echoes in the darkness. I know who did it, but the truth will never be told. Chapter 9. Through the broken glass. It wasn't the glass that shattered, it was the truth, and the pieces of it were now scattered across the floor, waiting to be put together in a way that no one could ever imagine. Father Brown stood in the ruined remains of the study, his heart pounding in his chest as he surveyed the scene. The glass had been shattered, but it wasn't the windows that had caught his attention. No, it was the jagged shards that lay scattered across the floor, the broken reflection of everything Father Brown thought he knew. The case had seemed like it was slowly coming to an end, each step a bit clearer than the last. But now the truth was slipping through his fingers, like shards of glass, too sharp to hold. The murder of Gregory Thorne had begun as a simple investigation, a death to solve, a mystery to unravel. But as Father Brown delved deeper into the case, it became clear that the truth was more complex than he had imagined. The layers of deception, the tangled lives of those involved, and the shadowy figures lurking just beyond his reach had made this far more than a murder case. This was a game, one that Father Brown wasn't sure he was winning. It started with Gregory's death, of course. A man found dead in the chapel, a single wound to the chest, a life taken too soon. But from the moment Father Brown arrived at the scene, something felt wrong. The chapel should have been silent, somber, but it was filled with whispers of fear, of secrets, of things left unsaid. Father Brown had questioned the witnesses, all of whom seemed to know just enough to cloud the truth, but not enough to provide clarity. There had been Edith, the woman who seemed to know more than she was letting on, and then there was the mysterious benefactor, the man who had controlled Gregory's life in ways no one fully understood. Father Brown had followed the trail through the town's shadows, uncovering more lies and deceit with each step. But the further he went, the more he realized that Gregory's death was only the tip of the iceberg. And now, standing in the shattered study, Father Brown knew he was standing at the precipice of something far more dangerous than he had anticipated. The pieces of the puzzle were there, but they were scattered and broken, each one sharp and painful, just like the shards of glass beneath his feet. As he crouched down to examine the broken glass, his mind raced through the events of the past few days, the fog, the whispers, the shadows. It all pointed to one thing. Someone was watching him. Someone had been pulling strings from the very beginning, orchestrating this twisted game from the shadows. But who? Who was the puppet master, and what did they want? Father Brown's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind him. He spun around, instinctively reaching for the crucifix hanging at his waist. But it wasn't a threat. It was Clara, the same Clara who had seen the figure in the shadows, the woman who had claimed to know something about Gregory's death. She stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Father," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I think it's time you knew the truth." Father Brown stood up slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Clara, I've been investigating for weeks, and every step I take just leads to more confusion. Who is behind this? Who is the one pulling the strings?" Clara hesitated for a moment, her gaze flickering nervously toward the shattered glass. "It's not just one person, Father. It's a group that's been hiding in plain sight, controlling everything, manipulating everyone around them." Father Brown felt a chill run down his spine. "Who are they, Clara?" Clara swallowed hard. "I can't say for sure, but I know one thing. They're all around you. They've been hiding behind masks, playing roles, and you've been walking right past them. The truth isn't just about Gregory's death. It's about something far bigger. They've been pulling the strings for years." Father Brown stared at her, his mind racing. "What do you mean? What are they after?" Clara stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. "They're after control, Father. Power. And they'll do anything to keep it." Father Brown's heart raced as he processed her words. A group, a conspiracy, and he had been blind to it all along. How could he have missed it? He had been so focused on the individual players, the suspects, the witnesses, that he had never looked at the bigger picture. The truth wasn't just about Gregory, it was about everyone. Suddenly, a sharp noise pierced the silence, a crash from the other room. Father Brown spun around, his heart in his throat. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in horror. Without thinking, Father Brown dashed toward the source of the noise, his feet pounding against the floor. He entered the next room to find the door wide, open, the lamp shattered on the floor, the curtains torn down. And there, standing in the center of the room, was a man, a figure in the shadows. Father Brown's breath caught in his throat. The man was tall, dressed in dark clothing, his face hidden in the dim light. But Father Brown could feel the power emanating from him, a cold, commanding presence that made the room feel smaller, darker. This wasn't just anyone. This was the figure Clara had spoken about. This was the person who had been watching them all along. "Who are you?" Father Brown demanded, his voice firm, despite the fear that gripped him. "What do you want?" The man said nothing, but Father Brown could feel his eyes on him. Cold, calculating eyes that seemed to pierce through him. The man raised a hand slowly, motioning for silence. And then, in a voice that sent a chill down Father Brown's spine, he spoke. "You've been asking the wrong questions, Father," the man said, his voice low and measured. "You've been looking for answers in the wrong places. You've been chasing ghosts. The truth isn't what you think it is. But I'll give you this. You've gotten closer than anyone else. You've uncovered the first part of the puzzle. But there's more, much more." Father Brown's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the man's words. The first part of the puzzle? What was he talking about? "What do you mean?" Father Brown asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is the truth?" The man stepped forward, his figure emerging from the shadows. His face was still obscured, but the air seemed to grow colder with each step he took. The truth, Father, is that you've been a part of this game all along. You're no different from the rest of them. You've been led down this path just like everyone else, and now you've reached the point of no return. Father Brown's heart pounded. He had been led down this path. He had thought he was the one uncovering the truth, the one pulling the strings. But now it felt as though he had been manipulated the entire time. He felt a wave of dread wash over him. "I don't understand," Father Brown said, his voice shaking. "Who are you? Who is behind this?" The man smiled, a cold, calculating smile that made Father Brown's skin crawl. "You already know, Father," he said, "but you won't find the answers you're looking for. You'll never find the truth. It's too late for that." With a sudden, almost unnatural movement, the man turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving Father Brown standing in the ruined study, his thoughts swirling in confusion and fear. Clara's voice broke through his daze. "Father, don't listen to him. He's been playing us all. The truth is out there, but it's not going to come easily." Father Brown stood motionless, the shattered glass beneath his feet, reflecting 1,000 possibilities, each one more dangerous than the last. The man had vanished, but his words lingered. The truth was out there, but Father Brown had no idea where to look. And even if he did find the answers, would he be able to trust them? The screen fades to black. Father Brown's voice echoes, calm but heavy with the weight of his realization. "I know who did it. But the truth, Father, the truth will never be told." Chapter 10. The Chapel's Secret. The chapel had always been a place of peace, but tonight it was the place where everything Father Brown thought he knew would come crashing down in a flood of terrifying truths. Father Brown had always considered the chapel a sanctuary, a place of solace in the midst of chaos. But as he walked into the dimly lit space that evening, a strange feeling of unease settled in his chest. There was something different about the chapel tonight, something that had been hidden in its very walls for years, waiting to be uncovered. And as Father Brown moved deeper into the heart of the chapel, he realized that the secret it held was far darker than anything he had encountered in this case. It was a secret that had been buried for so long, no one had even dared to imagine it. Father Brown had been chasing shadows for weeks, unraveling the tangled threads of Gregory Thorne's murder. Each step had led him deeper into a web of lies, deceit, and dark motives. But it wasn't until he found himself standing before the altar, staring at the worn stone floor beneath his feet, that he realized he was no longer hunting for the truth of a single death. The truth he was searching for was far older, rooted in the very history of the town itself. The murder of Gregory Thorne had always seemed like the central mystery, but as Father Brown delved further into the case, he found that every piece of information, every new lead, only deepened the enigma. Gregory's death had been too clean, too deliberate, and there had been something about the way the townsfolk spoke of him, something in their eyes when they looked away, that told Father Brown there was more to this story than just a simple murder. There was a connection, something that linked Gregory's death to the town's darkest secrets. But now, standing in the chapel, Father Brown could feel it, the weight of something unspeakable, something that had been hidden in the very foundation of this sacred place. As he paced the aisles, his mind raced through all the clues he had gathered. The whispers about a mysterious benefactor, the shadowy figure who seemed to control Gregory's life, The strange letter Father Brown had found in the chapel months ago, all of it was connected. But how? And why had no one dared speak of it before? Father Brown's eyes caught a glint of something in the corner of the chapel, a crack in the stone wall, barely visible in the low light. He moved toward it, his curiosity piqued. As he ran his fingers along the crack, he realized that it wasn't just a fissure in the wall. It was an opening, hidden from plain view. Father Brown hesitated for a moment, then with a quiet prayer, he pushed against the wall. It moved slightly, revealing a narrow passage hidden behind it. A chill ran down Father Brown's spine. What had he just uncovered? He knew that what lay beyond this hidden doorway could change everything. It had to. He had been searching for the truth for so long, but this felt different. It felt like the key to the entire mystery. Stepping carefully into the passage, Father Brown's heart raced. The passage was narrow, almost suffocating, and the air was thick with dust and the scent of age-old wood. He could barely make out the edges of the walls, but the deeper he went, the more he could hear the faintest sound, a distant, echoing drip of water, like a heartbeat in the silence. It led him further into the dark, twisting corridors beneath the chapel. He couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just walking through a forgotten part of the building. He was walking into something far more dangerous. Finally, the passage opened into a small, hidden room. At first it seemed empty, but as Father Brown stepped forward, his eyes fell upon something that made his blood run cold. A wooden chest, partially obscured in the corner of the room. It looked old, weathered, its edges worn from years of neglect. But there was something about it that felt important. Father Brown approached the chest slowly, every step measured. The room felt suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in on him. He knelt down beside the chest, carefully lifting the lid. What he saw inside made his heart stop. Inside the chest were papers, dozens of them, yellowed with age, covered in strange symbols and faded ink. But it wasn't just the papers that caught his attention. Nestled beneath them was a book, bound in dark leather, its cover embossed with a symbol Father Brown had never seen before. It was familiar, yet foreign, a symbol that seemed to pulse with a strange energy. As Father Brown reached for the book, his mind raced with questions. What had Gregory known? What had led him to this hidden room beneath the chapel? And what was this book? A record of some kind? A diary? A ledger of secrets? The answers were within his grasp, but as he flipped open the cover, something in the back of his mind told him that the truth he was about to uncover would change everything. The first page of the book was covered in dense writing, the words scrawled in haste, as if the author had been desperate to write them down before it was too late. Father Brown's eyes skimmed over the words, each one more chilling than the last. "There are forces at work here," the first sentence read. "Forces older than you can imagine, forces that have controlled this town for generations. The chapel is not what it seems, and the truth that lies within its walls is a truth that no one is ready to face." Father Brown's heart raced. The chapel was hiding something that had been concealed for generations. But what could it be? What had Gregory discovered that had led him to this moment? And why had he left behind these cryptic words, a warning to whoever found them? The next page revealed more details, names, dates, and locations, all tied to a long-forgotten history of the town. There were mentions of powerful families, figures from the past whose influence had shaped the town in ways Father Brown couldn't yet understand. But it wasn't just the names that stood out. It was the recurring mention of a ritual tied to the chapel itself, a ritual that promised power, control, and immortality. Father Brown's pulse quickened. Could it be? Was the town's history linked to something darker, something far more sinister than he had ever imagined? Was this ritual tied to Gregory's death? His fingers trembled as he turned the page, desperate to find answers. But what he found, on the next page, only deepened the mystery. There, in the middle of the page, was a name that sent a shock through Father Brown's entire being. The name was his own. Father Brown read the words over and over, his mind struggling to comprehend the implications. Father Brown must choose, it said, or the town will be lost forever. The chapel's secret can no longer be hidden. The time has come for the truth to be revealed. Father Brown felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. What was this? Was this some kind of twisted joke? How could his name be here, in this book? What did it mean? And why had Gregory left him this message? Had he known what was coming? Had he known that Father Brown would be the one to uncover this dark secret? Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed in the passage behind him. Father Brown's heart leapt into his throat as he spun around, the book clutched tightly in his hands. He had no idea who it could be, no idea who had followed him into this hidden room. But he knew one thing for sure. Whoever they were not here to help him. The footsteps grew louder, and then a voice spoke from the shadows. "You've uncovered too much, Father. Now there's no turning back." Father Brown's breath caught in his throat. He didn't need to see the face to know who it was. It was the same figure who had been shadowing him from the beginning, the one who had been controlling everything from the shadows, the man who had orchestrated Gregory's death, who had hidden the truth in the very walls of the chapel. Father Brown stood, clutching the book, his mind racing. The truth was within his reach, but now it seemed so far away. "Who are you?" Father Brown demanded, his voice steady, despite the fear that gripped him. "What is this? What do you want?" The figure stepped forward, emerging from the shadows. And as he did, the truth became clear. The chapel, the town, the murder, it had all been part of a much larger plan, a plan that had been set in motion long before Father Brown arrived. And now he was caught in the web, unable to escape. The figure smiled, a cold, calculating smile that made Father Brown's blood run cold. "You've uncovered the chapel's secret, Father, but some truths are too dangerous to be known." And with that, the figure stepped back into the shadows, leaving Father Brown standing in the dark, holding the book that contained the answers, but knowing he would never be able to understand them fully. The screen fades to black. Father Brown's voice echoes in the silence. "I know who did it, but the truth, Father, the truth will never be told." Chapter 11. The Quiet Reckoning. The truth had been whispered in the shadows for far too long. Now it would be screamed into the silence of the night, and no one would be able to ignore it. Father Brown stood motionless in the heart of the chapel, his breath caught in his throat, as the weight of the words he'd just heard crashed down upon him. The truth was no longer a faint, elusive whisper. It was a deafening roar, one that threatened to unravel everything he had ever believed. As the echoes of his thoughts reverberated through the cold stone walls, Father Brown knew with a certainty that chilled him to his very core. This was the reckoning. This was the moment where everything changed. For months, Father Brown had been chasing shadows. The murder of Gregory Thorne had seemed like an isolated event at first, a puzzle to be solved, a mystery to be unraveled. But the deeper he dug, the more he realized that this was no simple case of crime and punishment. There was something darker at play, something that had been hidden beneath the surface of Gillingham for generations. And now, standing at the center of the chapel, Father Brown finally understood. This was not just about Gregory's death. It was about the lives of everyone in this town, their secrets, and the reckoning that would come when those secrets were exposed. The story had started innocently enough. A man dead in the chapel, a trail of strange clues, a growing list of suspects. But as Father Brown pieced together the evidence, he began to see the disturbing patterns that emerged. Gregory's mysterious benefactor, the shadowy figure lurking in the background, had been pulling strings for years, manipulating people, controlling events, and carefully constructing a narrative that kept everyone in the dark. But Father Brown had gotten too close. He had uncovered too much, and now the truth was no longer something that could be hidden. It was coming to the surface, and there was no turning back. As Father Brown stepped closer to the altar, his mind whirred with the possibilities. The chapel, the heart of this town, had been the center of it all. But it was more than just a place of worship. It was a monument to power, an unspoken, unseen force that had controlled the lives of those in Gillingham for as long as anyone could remember. And Gregory Thorne had been caught in its web. The letter he had found, the one written by Gregory before his death, had been a cry for help, a warning to whoever would listen. Father Brown had read the words over and over, trying to make sense of them, but the deeper he got into the mystery, the more questions he had. What was this secret that had haunted Gregory's life? And who was this benefactor who had been watching from the shadows? Gregory had known too much. He had been trying to escape, but in the end, he had been silenced. Father Brown's thoughts were interrupted by a soft noise barely audible in the silence of the chapel. He turned toward the sound, his heart pounding in his chest. Was it a trick of the wind, or was someone else in the chapel with him? The air felt heavy, thick with anticipation, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. From the corner of the chapel, a figure emerged from the shadows, a figure he had seen before, but never like this. It was Edith, the woman who had been so tightly bound to the web of secrets surrounding Gregory. She stepped forward, her eyes wide with fear, her body trembling. She had been a victim in this story, someone who had been caught up in forces far beyond her control, but now, it seemed, she was the one holding the key to everything. "Father," she whispered, her voice shaking with urgency. "It's time you knew everything. You've uncovered parts of the truth, but you don't know what it really means." Father Brown stepped toward her, his mind racing. "What do you mean, Edith? What is it that I don't know?" Edith's eyes darted nervously around the chapel, as if expecting someone to be listening, even now. "The benefactor," she whispered. "It's not who you think it is. It's not just some man hiding in the shadows. The benefactor it's the town itself. It's the power that controls everything. The money, the influence, the people. It's embedded in every part of this place. The chapel is the center of it all." Father Brown's heart skipped a beat. What was she saying? The benefactor wasn't just one person. The entire town had been complicit in this. He stepped closer, desperate for clarification. "But how?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How is the town involved? How has it all been connected?" Edith's face contorted with a mixture of fear and sorrow. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before she spoke again. "It's been happening for generations, Father," she said. "The people in charge, they've been using the chapel to control the town. They've made deals, hidden things, manipulated the truth to keep everyone in line. And Gregory tried to fight it. He tried to expose them, but they wouldn't let him." Father Brown's mind reeled. Everything was starting to come together, but nothing made sense. The chapel, a place of holiness, had been twisted into something else entirely. A place of power, a place where secrets were kept, lives were ruined, and truth was buried. How had no one seen this before? "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Father Brown demanded, his voice shaking with frustration. "Why didn't you stop them?" "I couldn't," Edith said, her voice breaking. "I couldn't stop them, Father. No one could. They control everything. The town, the people, the very air we breathe. And now, it's too late. The reckoning is coming." Father Brown's chest tightened as he processed her words. A reckoning? What did she mean by that? And who would be left standing when it was all over? But before Father Brown could ask her to elaborate, Edith took a step back, her eyes widening in fear. "They're here," she whispered. Father Brown's heart raced. Who was here? And how had they found them so quickly? The room seemed to close in on him, the air growing thick and heavy. He turned quickly, his eyes scanning the chapel for any sign of movement. From the shadows, a voice rang out, low, menacing, and familiar. "I knew you would come here, Father." Father Brown's blood ran cold. The voice. It was the same figure who had been pulling the strings all along, the man who had orchestrated everything from the beginning. He had been in the shadows, hidden in plain sight, and now he was stepping into the light. "You," Father Brown whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "It's you, isn't it? You've been behind all of this." The figure stepped forward, emerging from the shadows, his face now clearly visible. It was Jonathan Stokes, the benefactor who had been controlling everything from behind the scenes. Father Brown had suspected it for so long, but seeing him now, in the flesh, brought a sickening clarity to everything. "I've been waiting for you, Father," Stokes said, his voice calm, almost cold. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long. But now, it's time for the truth to come out. The truth that will bring this town to its knees." Father Brown's heart pounded in his chest as Stokes approached, his eyes cold and calculating. "What truth?" Father Brown demanded. "What is it that you've been hiding?" Stokes smiled, a smile that was more like a sneer. "The truth, Father, is that you've been part of this from the very beginning. You just didn't know it. You were never going to stop it. No one ever could. The town has been built on lies, on manipulation, on control. And now it's time for the reckoning. You can't stop what's already been set in motion." Father Brown's mind raced. What was he talking about? Was it too late? Had everything he had done been in vain? As Stokes continued to speak, Father Brown felt his world spinning. The reckoning, the power, the control. It was all coming to a head. But what would be left when the dust settled? Suddenly, Father Brown's thoughts were interrupted by a loud crash from behind him. He turned around just in time to see a figure emerge from the shadows. A woman cloaked in darkness, her face hidden by the veil of her hood. "You've been looking for answers in the wrong places, Father," she said, her voice echoing in the chapel. Father Brown's heart stopped. He recognized her voice. It was Clara, Edith's sister. But what was she doing here? "What is this?" Father Brown demanded, his voice thick with confusion and fear. "What is happening?" But before Clara could speak, Stokes raised his hand, silencing her. "The truth, Father, is that there is no going back. It's too late for you. It's too late for all of us." And with that, the figure of Clara stepped forward, revealing a small, glowing object in her hand. Father Brown's eyes widened as he realized what it was. A key. But to what? To the town's future, to the chapel's darkest secrets. The room seemed to close in on him, the shadows growing thicker as the last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. "I know who did it," Father Brown whispered, his voice heavy with dread. "But the truth will never be told." Chapter 12. A Twist of Fate. The moment the door slammed shut behind Father Brown, he realized, too late, that the final piece of the puzzle wasn't a revelation at all, but a trap. The cold, unforgiving wind howled through the streets of Gillingham, the fog clinging to the ground like a dense, creeping blanket. Father Brown stood at the threshold of the chapel, his heart racing as the weight of what he had just uncovered sank in. The truth had always been elusive, a shadow just out of reach. But now it was clear. The truth was far darker than he could have imagined, and far more dangerous. For weeks, Father Brown had been piecing together the strange and twisted puzzle of Gregory Thorne's death, following a trail of clues that seemed to twist and turn in every direction. The benefactor, the mysterious figure who had controlled so many lives in Gillingham, had been the center of it all. And yet, despite all the secrets he had uncovered, Father Brown couldn't shake the feeling that something had been kept from him, a truth hidden in plain sight, waiting for him to make the wrong move. And in that moment, standing at the edge of the chapel, he knew that the next step in this twisted mystery was the most dangerous yet. The murder had been a smokescreen, a carefully crafted lie meant to distract him from the true horror that lurked beneath. Gregory Thorne's death had not been an isolated event. It was part of something far larger, something that stretched back generations. There were forces at work here, forces that no one dared to confront, forces that would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. Father Brown had come so far, but the final piece of the puzzle eluded him. And now, it was clear, someone was playing him. The question was no longer about who had killed Gregory Thorne. It was about who had been manipulating Father Brown from the very beginning. As he stood in the chapel, the familiar scent of incense thick in the air, Father Brown's mind raced. The walls seemed to close in around him as the weight of everything he had learned threatened to crush him. The town of Gillingham, the people he had known for so long, were all part of a web of lies that had been spun long before he ever set foot here. But there was one truth that stood out among the rest, something that no one had ever told him. Gregory had been more than just a victim. He had been a part of the plan, a piece in a much larger game, and now Father Brown had become part of that game, whether he wanted to be or not. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The chapel was eerily silent, the kind of silence that made the air feel thick and oppressive. Father Brown had learned to trust his instincts, and right now they were screaming at him. Something was wrong. Something had changed. The tension in the air was palpable, as if the very chapel itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, in the distance, he saw it. A figure emerging from the shadows, moving silently toward him. It was a person, cloaked in dark clothing, their face obscured by the hood of their cloak. Father Brown's heart skipped a beat. He had seen this figure before, the one who had been pulling the strings from the shadows. But now, in the dim light of the chapel, there was something different about them, something darker. The figure moved closer, their footsteps silent on the stone floor. Father Brown's pulse quickened as the figure stopped in front of him, their face still hidden beneath the cloak. There was an air of calm about them, an unsettling calm that made Father Brown's stomach turn. "You've come far, Father," the figure said, their voice low and smooth, like a whisper on the wind. "But you're too late." Father Brown's breath caught in his throat. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. "What do you want?" The figure tilted their head slightly, as if considering Father Brown's words. "What do I want?" they repeated softly. "I want what everyone wants: control, power. And now, Father, you've reached the end of your search, but the truth you seek isn't something you're meant to find." Father Brown's mind raced. What was this person saying? Was this the person behind everything? The one who had manipulated Gregory, who had orchestrated the murder? And why had they brought him here, to this moment, when the truth was finally within reach? The figure stepped forward, their face still hidden, but their presence overwhelming. Father Brown felt a cold shiver run down his spine as the figure spoke again. "You've been searching for answers, Father, but the truth is, you've been asking the wrong questions. You've been trying to uncover the lies, but the lies were never the problem. The problem is that you've been blind to the bigger picture. You've been chasing ghosts." Father Brown's heart pounded in his chest. The words cut through him like a blade, each one leaving a deeper wound. What was this person talking about? What had he missed? What truth was he blind to? The figure's hand moved slowly to their cloak, and with a swift motion, they pulled back the hood, revealing their face. Father Brown's eyes widened in shock. It was someone he knew, someone he had trusted. "No," Father Brown whispered, his voice trembling. "It can't be." The figure before him smiled, a cold, knowing smile. "You've always been so clever, Father, but you never saw it coming. You never saw the truth that was right in front of you. You've been so focused on uncovering the lies that you never questioned why the truth was hidden." Father Brown's mind raced, but his thoughts were a blur. How could this be? How could the person standing before him be the one pulling the strings all along? Everything he thought he knew about this case was wrong. Everything was a lie. The figure's smile widened as they stepped closer, their voice lowering to a whisper. "You wanted to expose the truth, Father. But some truths are too dangerous to be known. The reckoning is here, and you're just a pawn in a game that's much bigger than you." Father Brown's knees felt weak as the weight of the revelation hit him. He had been playing into someone's hands the entire time. All the evidence he had uncovered, all the people he had trusted, had been part of a carefully orchestrated plan, a plan that had led him to this moment. "Why?" Father Brown managed to ask, his voice strained. "Why me? Why now?" The figure chuckled softly, a sound that sent chills down Father Brown's spine. "Because, Father, you're the only one who can stop it. You're the only one who has the power to break the cycle. But you're too late. The pieces are already in motion, and there's nothing you can do to stop it now." Father Brown's mind was reeling. He had been so sure he was on the right path, so confident that he would uncover the truth. But now it seemed the truth had been twisted into something darker, something far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. The figure stepped back into the shadows, their face now obscured once more. "You've done your part, Father. But now it's time for the rest of the town to pay the price for their secrets. And you? Well, you'll be forgotten, just like the others." With those words, the figure vanished into the shadows, leaving Father Brown alone in the chapel, his mind swirling with confusion, fear, and disbelief. The truth he had been searching for was no longer within his reach. He had been played. And now, the reckoning had come for everyone in Gillingham. Father Brown stood in the silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His heart pounded in his chest as the truth settled in. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered. The lies, the deception, the manipulation. It was all part of a much bigger plan. A plan that had been set in motion long before Father Brown ever stepped into this town. And now it was too late to stop it. The door to the chapel creaked open behind him, but Father Brown didn't turn. He didn't need to. He knew what was coming next. The town of Gillingham would face its reckoning, and there was nothing he could do to change it. The screen fades to black. Father Brown's voice, soft but heavy, with the weight of the truth, echoes, "I know who did it. But the truth, Father, the truth will never be told."